Hi everybody, welcome you all for the Raaonline teaching program. So today's session is going to be about fetal and neonatal circulation. As you all know, the fetal circulation is completely different from the neonatal circulation. It has to undergo certain circulatory changes during the time of birth to transition between the fetus and the neonatus. So the heart assumes its normal 4-chambered shape by the end of 6 weeks of intrauterine life. So mainly for the exchange of the gases and the fetus mainly depends upon the placental circulation, whereas the neonate is dependent upon the lungs. So immediately following the birth, the lungs has to expand, it has to start its own function, thereby the shift occurs between the placenta and the lungs. So this is only we are going to see in detail about in this presentation. So regarding the basic differences between the fetal and neonatal circulation. So if you see the gaseous exchange, mainly the placenta plays a role in the inside the fetus, whereas the lungs plays the role of gaseous exchange in the neonatal circulation. And regarding the pulmonary circulation, as the lungs are being collapsed inside the womb, it is vasoconstricted, whereas in neonatal it is dilated. And predominant ventricle is the right ventricle in the fetus and left ventricle in the neonatal circulation. And this RV-LV circulation, that is right ventricle and left ventricle circulation, mainly behaves as a parallel circuit in fetus, whereas it behaves as a series of circuit in neonatal circulation. So mainly the unique cardiovascular structures that mainly acts inside the fetus are the three structures: Ductus Venosus, Ductus Arteriosus and foramen ovale. So what happens? This Ductus Venosus basically it transfers all the saturated blood from the placenta through the IVC into the left atrium. Let me explain you with the pictures in the next slide. So as of now, you have to know about the three important structures in the fetal circulation that plays a very major role. That is Ductus Venosus, Ductus Arteriosus and patent foramen ovale. Okay, so these becomes rudimentary once the neonatal circulation takes up. So it becomes ligamentum teres as a medial umbilical ligament or ligamentum venosum and arteriosum and fossa ovalis. So if you see in this picture, mainly see this is the placenta, and from the placenta there is a single umbilical vein that is red in color and the two umbilical arteries. So there will be one umbilical vein and two umbilical arteries. So what happens here? The first square, the blood, that is the saturated blood comes from the placenta through the umbilical vein, it reaches. So here the blood, most of the blood, it bypasses the hepatic circulation and through the ductus venosus. This is the ductus venosus. It joins the inferior vena cava. So through the ductus venosus, major part of the placental blood from the placenta through the umbilical vein, it reaches the IVC. Okay. The ductus venosus, it shunts the oxygenated blood from the placenta away from the liver and towards the heart. Okay. So this happens in the first level. So what happens basically, even though the placenta plays a role of the lungs inside the fetus, it is not as efficient as the gaseous exchange as compared to the lungs. Mostly the partial pressures of oxygen will be low in case of blood in the umbilical vein. That is, the partial pressure, if you see, it is around only 30 to 35 millimeters of mercury. So this is the highest oxygen tension inside the fetus. So here it will be 30 to 35 millimeters of mercury. So what happens when the blood passes via the ductus venosus into the IVC, some amount of desaturated blood from the lower part of the body also combines here. So here the blood gets mixed up, both the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mixed up here. So some amount of oxygen pressures will come down. That is, here it is around 26 to 28 millimeters of mercury. So this only now reaches. So this now reaches the through the IVC. Here it now reaches the right atrium. So from the right atrium through the foramen ovale. So this is the foramen ovale. Through the foramen ovale, what happens? It directly, the oxygenated blood reaches the left atrium. Okay. So through the foramen ovale, it oxygenated blood from the right atrium, it reaches into the left atrium. And third thing is, now we have seen about the two things. This first one is the ductus venosus and second one is the foramen ovale. The third one lies here. This is the ductus arteriosus. Okay. So what happens? The ductus arteriosus, it connects the aorta with the pulmonary artery. So further shunting of the blood away from the lungs and passing into the aorta occurs through this shunt. And finally, the fourth place where the mixed blood travels to the head and body and back to the placenta via the aorta. So this is the thing that happens inside the fetus. Okay, so this is mainly the placental circulation. So here if you see, the major source of left ventricular blood flow is because the pulmonary venous return is very minimal. The major source is from the umbilical vein only. The fetal superior vena cava blood, it is considered to be the very less oxygenated blood. That here this blood is very low oxygenated, only 12 to 14 millimeters of mercury. So PO2 is only 12 to 14 millimeters of mercury. So this is basically forms the fetal circulation. So what are the adjustments that takes place after the birth?